Welcome to another deep dive. You sent over some really fascinating stuff from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
Yeah,
It's audio lectures and excerpts,
yeah,
focusing on evolution morality, even the idea of flow.
absolutely.
Are you ready to kind of unpack some of his most compelling ideas and see how they connect back to us?
I'm ready.
Awesome.
Yeah. What I find fascinating about Csikszentmihalyi is how he challenges us to look beyond just the survival of the fittest
Right.
narrative. He argues that the real driving force of evolution is increasing complexity of consciousness.
Yeah, he uses these really interesting historical examples to kind of illustrate this point.
Yes.
He compares like Athens in the 5th century BC to its decline centuries later,
Right.
and the cultural scene of Florence during the Renaissance compared to other periods.
Yes, exactly. And what's striking is that, he highlights the fragility of complexity.
Right,
It doesn't just automatically win out.
right.
Societies can regress, and that potential for greater consciousness can be lost.
Mm.
This is where individual choices become so crucial.
So it's not just about understanding evolution as this kind of like abstract concept.
Right.
He's suggesting that every decision we make, every action we take, actually contributes to the overall direction of evolution.
Precisely. He even uses this term negentropy
Okay.
to describe the process of achieving greater harmony, both within ourselves and with others,
Yeah.
which then leads to this higher complexity.
Mm.
And this idea of negentropy isn't just some theoretical notion.
Right.
It has practical implications for how we live our lives.
So how do we cultivate this negentropy? Like,
Uh,
how do we make choices that contribute to greater complexity in ourselves and in the world around us?
Well, that's where Csikszentmihalyi's ideas about morality come in.
Okay.
He argues that our moral codes, despite their apparent differences across cultures,
Right.
are all ultimately attempts to consciously shape evolution towards greater harmony.
So he's saying even though they look different on the surface,
Yes.
they actually share a common goal. They're all trying to guide us towards a more complex and harmonious existence.
Yes. And he uses some really compelling examples to illustrate this.
Okay.
For instance, he points to the Buddhist concept of the 10 worlds,
Okay.
which essentially describes a progression towards greater complexity of consciousness.
That reminds me of other psychological frameworks like Maslow's hierarchy
Yes.
or even theories of ego development.
Right.
All seem to suggest that as we mature, we move towards greater integration, greater complexity, and a deeper understanding of ourselves in the world.
Exactly. And this ties back to the idea of negentropy.
Okay.
We're not just passively swept along by evolutionary forces.
Yeah.
We have the capacity through our choices and actions to consciously contribute to a more complex and harmonious future.
So where does the concept of population control fit into all of this?
That's a great question.
I know it's a big focus in the materials.
Yeah, it's one of the most challenging aspects of his work. He asks this very difficult question: how do we balance individual freedom with the need to manage population growth and resource allocation?
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from the ethical complexities.
No.
He brings up some pretty controversial historical examples, too, like the rape of the Sabine women, which was essentially, a way to ensure population growth through force.
Right. And he contrasts that with other historical practices where societies actively limited procreation based on available resources, or even, the sensitive topic of eugenics, both its positive and negative manifestations.
It's really interesting how he highlights this tension between our modern belief in universal procreation rights and this historical reality of societies that actively managed reproduction for survival.
Yeah.
It's this question of how do we apply a morality of complexity to this issue?
Right.
How do we find a way to ensure both individual rights and the long-term sustainability of our species?
And it's a question that's becoming even more urgent
Mhm.
as we face the challenges of climate change and resource scarcity.
Right,
He doesn't offer easy answers,
right.
but he compels us to grapple with these ethical dilemmas and consider the potential consequences of our choices.
This deep dive is definitely living up to its name.
Yeah.
We're exploring some really complex and sometimes uncomfortable ideas.
Right.
But I think it's crucial to have these conversations.
Absolutely.
And speaking of complexity, one of the most fascinating concepts that he introduces is this idea of memes.
Yes. Now, before you think we're talking about
Right.
funny cat pictures on the internet,
Yeah.
let me clarify. Csikszentmihalyi uses the term meme in a much broader sense.
Okay.
He's referring to any idea, belief behavior, or even piece of technology
Right.
that replicates and competes for space in our minds.
So like a cultural gene in a way.
Exactly.
These memes are spreading through society, shaping our thoughts, values, even our actions.
And just as with genes, we can talk about mimetic eugenics.
Hmm.
The idea that we can consciously promote the spread of beneficial memes and limit the harmful ones, this raises an important question for each of us.
Yeah.
What are the memes we are choosing to cultivate, both in our own minds and in the world around us?
He gives this really simple example.
Yes.
He talks about choosing between reading a gossip magazine and a nature magazine.
Right.
Before picking one up, he encourages us to consider which will provide a more complex and enriching experience, which will nourish our minds with more beneficial memes.
It's a powerful reminder that even our seemingly insignificant choices
Right.
can have an impact on our own mental and emotional landscape,
Yeah.
as well as on the broader cultural environment.
Yeah, this is making me rethink my entire social media feed.
Uh-huh.
So if we're being more mindful about the memes we're consuming, how do we actually identify and cultivate the ones that will lead to greater complexity and harmony, both in our own lives and in society?
Well, this is where Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow comes into play.
Okay.
He argues that flow states, those moments of complete absorption and joyful engagement in an activity, are not just about feeling good. They're actually crucial for our individual and collective evolution.
So we're going from memes to flow.
Yeah.
I'm seeing how these ideas are starting to connect, but maybe you can unpack this a little further. How does flow relate to this idea of complexity and evolution?
Okay, great question. It takes us to the heart of his work.
Okay.
He argues that flow experiences are intrinsically rewarding because they allow us to tap into our potential for complexity.
Okay.
When we're in a state of flow, we're fully engaged, our skills are challenged, and we're constantly learning and growing.
He paints such vivid pictures of flow states. Like,
Yes.
he talks about the rock climber feeling like a panther, the surgeon's focused precision, the chess player losing themselves in the game.
Exactly. And what's so compelling about these examples
Mm.
is that they highlight how flow is not limited to any particular activity or skill level.
Mm.
It's a state of being that's accessible to anyone, regardless of their background or interests.
So it's not just about finding flow in grand pursuits or extraordinary talents.
Right.
It's about recognizing the potential for flow in our everyday experiences.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets really interesting, for you as someone exploring these ideas.
Yeah.
Csikszentmihalyi argues that the more we can cultivate flow in our lives, whether it's through our work, our hobbies, our relationships, or even our everyday activities, the more we're contributing to our own personal growth and to the evolution of consciousness as a whole.
That's a really powerful idea.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that even seemingly mundane activities can become sources of flow
Right.
and contribute to something much larger than ourselves.
Exactly. And this leads to another fascinating aspect of his work,
Yeah.
the idea of the transcendent self.
Hmm.
He argues that individuals who consistently find flow in complex activities that contribute to greater harmony
Yeah.
are not only living more fulfilling lives, but they're also playing a crucial role in shaping a more positive future.
Okay, I'm really intrigued by this concept of the transcendent self, but before we dive into that,
Oh.
I think we need to take a deeper look at the experience of flow itself.
Yes.
Um, I know Csikszentmihalyi outlines 8 key dimensions of flow, and I think understanding those will help us see how we can actually cultivate more flow in our own lives.
Absolutely. Those 8 dimensions provide a roadmap for creating the conditions for flow to occur, and I think they'll offer some really practical insights for you as you continue to explore these ideas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right.
So let's delve into those 8 dimensions of flow that he outlines. He doesn't just leave us with this abstract concept. He gives us a framework for understanding how it actually works.
Exactly. And it starts with having clear goals.
Yeah.
Think about those moments when you've been completely absorbed in an activity.
Yeah.
You probably had a very specific objective in mind.
Right. Like when you're playing a game, you know the rules. You have a clear objective to win, and you're getting constant feedback on your performance.
Precisely. And even though not every activity in life has such well-defined rules, we can still apply this principle. Whether we're writing a report, learning a new skill, or even having a meaningful conversation,
Right.
setting clear goals helps us focus our attention and track our progress.
So it's about creating a sense of structure and direction, even in activities that might seem more open-ended.
Yes. And the second dimension of flow builds on this. It's the merging of action and awareness.
Okay.
This is that feeling of being completely absorbed in the task at hand, where distractions fade away and you're fully present in the moment.
I've definitely experienced that. It's like being in a zone where you're so focused that you lose track of time and everything else around you just disappears.
Exactly. And Csikszentmihalyi gives some great examples of this. He talks about the chess player who hears nothing but the clicking of the pieces, the surgeon who's completely focused on the delicate procedure, the musician who loses themselves in the music.
It's fascinating how this state of intense concentration can apply to such a wide range of activities, from highly skilled professions to creative pursuits to everyday tasks.
And it's this merging of action and awareness that leads to the third dimension of flow, the loss of self-consciousness.
I was curious about this one. Doesn't losing self-consciousness mean you're not aware of what you're doing?
Not at all.
Oh,
It's not about becoming unaware, but rather about transcending those nagging self-doubts and worries about how we're perceived by others.
oh,
It's that feeling of freedom from judgment, both internal and external.
I get it. It's
Yeah,
like when you're so engrossed in what you're doing that you stop worrying about what other people might think. You're just completely focused on the task itself.
precisely. And this liberation from self-consciousness allows us to tap into a deeper level of creativity and perform at our best. Csikszentmihalyi quotes a rock climber who describes this feeling as becoming like an animal getting lost in kinesthetic sensation, a panther powering up the rock.
That's such a great image. It captures that sense of effortless power and grace that comes with being completely in the flow.
And it highlights another dimension of flow, the distortion of time. When we're in flow, our perception of time shifts. Hours can feel like minutes, and minutes can stretch out into what feels like an eternity.
I've definitely experienced that I can get so absorbed in a project that I completely lose track of time. It's like stepping into a different reality.
And it's in this altered state of time that we experience the fifth dimension of flow, the autotelic nature of the experience. This means the activity becomes enjoyable for its own sake, not for some external reward.
So it's not about achieving a goal or getting recognition. The reward is the experience itself.
Exactly. And this is what makes flow so sustainable. It's not driven by external motivation, but by an intrinsic desire for the challenge and the joy of the experience.
This really challenges the way we often think about motivation, doesn't it? We're so conditioned to work towards external rewards that we forget about the inherent satisfaction that can come from simply engaging in an activity that we find intrinsically rewarding.
Yes. And the next three dimensions of flow build on this idea of intrinsic motivation. They focus on the feedback we receive during the activity, the balance between our skills and the challenge, and the feeling of control we experience.
Okay, let's break those down. What does he mean by feedback? Isn't that similar to what we were talking about with clear goals?
It's related, but this is more about the immediate and unambiguous feedback we receive during the activity itself. When we're in flow, we know instinctively if we're on the right track.
Like if you're playing a musical instrument and you hit a wrong note, you know it instantly. Or if you're coding and your program crashes, you get immediate feedback that something's not working.
Exactly. And it's this clear and immediate feedback that allows us to make adjustments and continue to refine our skills. This brings us to the seventh dimension, the balance between challenge and skills. Flow occurs when our skills are perfectly matched to the demands of the activity.
So it's not just about doing something easy and mindless. There needs to be a certain level of challenge to keep us engaged.
Yes, that's crucial. If the challenge is too low, we get bored. If it's too high, we get frustrated and anxious. Flow happens in that sweet spot where our skills are stretched but not overwhelmed.
I can see how that relates to the eighth dimension, the feeling of control. If you have the skills to meet the challenge, you naturally feel a sense of mastery over the situation.
Exactly. And this sense of control doesn't mean we're trying to dominate or force things to happen. It's more about a feeling of effortless ease and confidence that comes from being in harmony with the activity.
It's interesting how these 8 dimensions intertwine and build on each other. You can really see how they create a recipe for that optimal experience that he calls flow.
And the beauty of this framework is that it's not just descriptive, it's prescriptive.
Hmm.
By understanding these dimensions, we can start to identify the activities that are most likely to induce flow for us, and we can begin to create the conditions for flow to occur more frequently in our lives.
So it's not about waiting for flow to magically happen. We can actually be proactive in cultivating it.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets really exciting, because the more we understand about flow, the more we can harness its power to enhance our creativity, productivity, well-being, and even our sense of purpose.
This is making me think about all those times I felt truly alive and engaged. Those moments of complete absorption in an activity where time seemed to stand still, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction.
Exactly. And what's so exciting is that those experiences aren't just flukes. They're glimpses into our potential for flow, and they're pointing us towards a more fulfilling and meaningful way of living.
I'm already starting to think about how I can apply these ideas to my own life. But before we get too practical, I want to go back to something we touched on earlier, the benefits of flow. You mentioned that it's not just about feeling good. There are actually tangible, positive outcomes associated with flow states, right?
Absolutely. And those benefits go far beyond the subjective experience of enjoyment. Flow states have been linked to increased creativity, peak performance talent development,
Yeah.
higher productivity, and even greater self-esteem and stress reduction.
That's quite a list. And I know he also talks about the therapeutic potential of flow, especially in helping people overcome anxiety and depression.
Yes, and this is where the concept of flow starts to connect back to those bigger themes of evolution and complexity.
Mm.
When we're in flow, we're not just feeling good. We're literally rewiring our brains, expanding our capacity for consciousness, and contributing to a more harmonious and fulfilling future.
Wow, that's powerful. It's like flow is this hidden superpower that we all have access to, and it can be used to transform not just our own lives, but the world around us. But I'm wondering, what about the flip side? What happens when we're not experiencing flow?
That's a great question, and it leads us into some of the more challenging aspects of his work,
Hmm.
because he argues that when people can't find flow in healthy ways,
Hmm.
they often turn to destructive activities.
Like addiction, mindless entertainment, or even engaging in risky behaviors.
Exactly. And it's not because they're inherently bad people, but because they're seeking that same sense of stimulation, engagement, and escape that flow provides.
Mm.
But these substitutes ultimately lead to entropy, not complexity.
It's like we're hardwired to seek out flow, but if we don't know how to cultivate it in healthy ways, we'll end up chasing it through substitutes that can be harmful to ourselves and others.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to the idea of mimetic eugenics. The choices we make, the information we consume, the activities we engage in, they're all shaping our mental and emotional landscape, and they're contributing to the evolution of culture as a whole.
This is making me rethink my entire approach to leisure time. It's not just about escaping from work or responsibilities. It's about actively choosing activities that nourish our minds, challenge our skills, and contribute to our overall well-being.
And this is where those 8 dimensions of flow become so valuable. They provide a roadmap for making more conscious choices about how we spend our time and energy, and they empower us to create more opportunities for flow in our everyday lives.
This deep dive is really starting to connect the dots for me. We've gone from evolution and complexity to morality and population control, and now we're seeing how the experience of flow can actually bridge the gap between the individual and the collective.
And that brings us to one of the most inspiring aspects of his work, his exploration of what he calls the transcendent self.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into that. We've laid the groundwork with these other concepts, and I'm really curious to see how he defines the transcendent self and what role it plays in this larger evolutionary story.
I think you'll find his perspective on this really fascinating, and I have a feeling it will resonate deeply with you as someone who's clearly drawn to these ideas of complexity, flow, and personal growth.
Okay, I'm ready to explore this idea of the transcendent self. It feels like we've been kind of circling around it this whole deep dive, from the fragility of complexity to the power of flow. Now, I'm really curious to hear how he brings it all together.
Yeah, it's interesting. He doesn't offer a rigid definition of the transcendent self. It's less about fitting a specific mold and more about recognizing a certain trajectory, a way of moving through the world that embraces complexity and contributes to harmony.
So it's not like there's a checklist of traits or accomplishment.
Right.
That makes someone a transcender. It's more about their orientation towards life,
Yes.
their values, their actions.
Exactly. And he highlights this by sharing such diverse examples.
Right.
We talk about György Faludy, the poet, who found beauty and meaning even in the horrors of a concentration camp.
Right.
His story is just this powerful testament to the human capacity for resilience and creative expression, even in the face of unimaginable suffering.
And then we have someone like Susie Valdez, the queen of the dumps, who dedicated her life to helping the homeless. I mean, their lives and circumstances were vastly different, but they both embody this idea of transcendence.
Yeah. What's fascinating is that he also includes examples of more, ordinary people who might not be famous or achieve extraordinary things,
Yeah.
but who still exemplify this transcendent quality.
Right. Like Ben the teenager who found so much joy and purpose in his woodworking.
Exactly.
Mhm.
His story really resonated with me.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that transcendence isn't about grand gestures or exceptional talent.
Right.
It's about finding flow and purpose in whatever we do,
Right.
whether it's pursuing a creative passion, mastering a skill, or simply contributing to our community.
He even shares the example of that Italian family of weavers, passing down their craft through generations.
Yes.
It highlights how transcendence can be woven into the fabric of everyday life, connecting us to something larger than ourselves.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, look, You don't have to be a saint or a genius to live a transcendent life.
Right.
It's about cultivating a certain mindset, a way of being in the world that embraces complexity, seeks out flow, and contributes to a more harmonious future.
And it's a vision that's so relevant for us today as we face these unprecedented challenges,
Yes.
climate change, social division, technological disruption. We need individuals who can think systemically, act with compassion, and find creative solutions to complex problems.
Absolutely.
So in a way, cultivating this transcendent self isn't just about personal fulfillment.
Right.
It's about equipping ourselves to navigate the complexities of the 21st century and contribute to a more sustainable and just world.
Exactly. And I think he would argue that flow is the key to unlocking this potential.
Okay.
Because when we're in flow, we're not just feeling good or being productive.
Right.
We're expanding our capacity for consciousness,
Right.
connecting to something larger than ourselves and
Yeah.
contributing to the evolution of a more complex and harmonious world.
This deep dive has been a real mind expander. I'm already starting to see the world through a different lens,
That's great.
and I'm feeling inspired to kind of apply these ideas to my own life.
As you continue to reflect on these concepts, I'd like to leave you with one final thought that he didn't explicitly address,
Okay.
but that kind of builds on his work. Imagine if we applied this idea of flow not just to individuals,
Okay.
but to groups, organizations, even entire societies.
That's a fascinating idea. What if we designed our workplaces, our schools, our communities in ways that fostered flow,
Yes.
that encouraged people to develop their skills, take on meaningful challenges, and contribute to a shared purpose?
What if we prioritized experiences of deep engagement, meaning, and even joy, not just productivity and profit?
It's a really provocative thought.
It is.
It makes you wonder what kind of world we could create if we intentionally designed for flow, for complexity, for transcendence.
Right.
It's a vision worth striving for, both individually and collectively.
And I think his work provides a powerful framework for moving in that direction.
Yeah.
By understanding the dynamics of flow, by cultivating the transcendent self, by consciously choosing the memes that shape our minds and our culture,
Right.
we can contribute to a more harmonious and fulfilling future, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come.
What a thought-provoking way to end this deep dive. Thanks for taking this journey with us. Until next time.